Hello everyone, my name is Ishan Khosla and I'm excited to be speaking at Type Tribes Communities, initiated by the Type Directors Club, New York. I'm an associate professor at UPES Dehradun and a partner at the Typecraft initiative. I'm a visual artist, designer, and educator based in India. Today I'll be talking about Pehchan, identity, type, people. The Typecraft initiative was established in 2012 with the aim to create greater exchange between urban designers and rural craftspeople. On the one hand, it allows designers to work with rich crafts of South Asia, and on the other, it allows artisans to try out new ways to represent their craft that suit new audiences, contexts, and mediums. Simply put, Typecraft is about making typefaces from Indian crafts and folk arts. The core ethos of Typecraft is diversity. Diversity is an essential aspect of the natural world as well as human culture. Both, interestingly, are under threat due to various forces. For each of our projects, we try to seek out disparate groups of people working in various materials and who belong to different parts of the subcontinent. This is a map of India showcasing the various states in which we have worked. Um, the darker colors show you uh, states where we've created letter forms or typographic identities based on local Indian crafts. And the states with the lighter color are where we may display typefaces in. We hope to work with the crafts of other South Asian cultures as well. What you see now is that you see the example of various crafts or typefaces based on different states of the country. And so each craft belongs to a specific community who live in a particular region. Of course, it identifies that community. Each craft has its own materiality process of making and context. Pehchan means both introduction and identity. The making of the type-crafted letter forms is then enabling us to be introduced to the craftswomen and their communities via the crafts they use. By embedding motifs, patterns, and symbols that is relevant to a group. So in this way, the Typecraft initiative is creating a living archive of each community. Ultimately, what we're doing is fairly unprecedented and in a way contrary to how mainstream font design is viewed in the world. The modernist construct of form follows function, where function is devoid of its social construct and relegated to the idea of utilitarianism, goes contrary to what we're trying to do. In our case, social and cultural values are part of the core function of the craft and the pehchan of the typeface. To understand the complex process of a typecrafted font, I'll take you through the making of GODNA, which means tattoo art, tribal tattoo art, which we made into a Latin script typeface in collaboration with the Goan tribe of Chhattisgarh in central India. Through this project, as far as we know, we have created the world's first typeface based on an ancient tribal tattoo. We worked with Goan tribal artists who etch skin with tattoos of their own tribe as well as other tribal women. They are known as Godharin. And the Goan tribe is one of the largest tribes of India, which span the forested regions of central Indian states of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. There are various steps in making tattoos, including preparing the ink, which is made from soot from a kerosene flame, and the needle clusters that are used to inscribe the tattoo design. In ancient times, they would use thorns instead of needles when metal was not readily available. First, the design is drawn and then inscribed onto the part of the body where it needs to be inscribed. And then turmeric paste is applied as an antiseptic. A puja or a prayer is also done after the tattoo has been inscribed. Women sing songs while the tattoo is being inscribed to distract the person from the pain receiving the tattoos. Today, tattooing in these tribal communities is over. One only sees older women with tattoos. So for this typeface, we worked with three Godaran women, Sunita, Sumitra, and Ramkeli. We begin each project through a workshop where we can have an open exchange of ideas and creativity with the craftswomen we work with. So, drawing letters can be fairly intimidating experience for anyone who's not used to drawing them, especially for certain craftspeople who've come from remote areas and who especially don't may not know the language, let alone typography or type design. So, in order to kind of break the ice, we actually start by us understanding and learning about their culture and their craft, the motives, the designs that they use, and the meaning behind them. Here we see a lexicon of most of the tattoo designs used by the Godaran on the Goan tribal women. Adivasi or tribals are the original people of India, mainly living in the forested and mountainous regions of the country. And so these tattoos they use tattoos extensively on their bodies, and tattoos have various functions that go beyond mere decoration. They're not only markers of identity and rites of passage, but they also have other purposes such as healing. Here, what we're seeing is we asked each of the women to draw the various tattoos on where in the body, on the body, they are inscribed. Here you can see that each tattoo has its own name and I guess a period or a time when it's inscribed, either during puberty or marriage, or even in the case of the bichu or scorpion tattoo, it's applied basically on the back, on the shoulder blade, when a woman may have been bitten by a scorpion. So there are a lot of scorpions in this kind of forested area where they live in. Uh, they also believe that this is a highly tropical area with many diseases, and before the advent of antibiotics and modern medicine, tattoos were considered and still till recently still were considered to be healing devices or used to heal ailments and diseases. They also believe that tattoos, Amargahini means that tattoos go beyond into the afterlife. They're like jewelry that live beyond one's life. So we start every Typecraft project by asking the women to make the letter forms themselves. So the first stage was, of course, getting to know the background and them drawing the letters and the motifs. I mean, sorry, not the letters, but the motifs and the patterns, and explaining to us the meaning behind that. But the second stage, when we get into letters, we first ask them to draw it without any constraints, based on their crafts. So this gives them a chance to express themselves and have some sort of ownership of the project. Here we see an initial set of letters drawn by the artists, and what we see is that although they are very beautiful and raw, they are hard to convert into a typeface because of the irregularity in the cap heights and the widths. And so then the next step is to use some of the insights we get from here, or some of the ways they have constructed these letters. Like you can see the repetition of those lines on the border of the R, or the inclusion of motifs, tattoo motifs, inside the counters of letters. So these are all their own concepts. So what we did was, in the next step, we just gave them a series of constraints, such as using a pencil, sticking to a certain cap height, and then basically letter thicknesses and proportions were given to them just by hand drawing, without many references. So they still had some amount of freedom, but within a set of constraints. After this, we got into scanning and tracing each of those letters, tweaking them if needed. As you can see here, that the letters are becoming more sharper as you go down from the hand-drawn letters to the scanned raster images, and then finally to the vector. minor tweaks such as things that are missing or things that need to be fixed were done. And then finally we get into the stage of font development where Andrea Balius worked on this, and um, I won't get into the detail of the font development stage, but all I can say is that this typeface has a large number of nodes, as you can see, and so it was fairly complex to make it work in the glyphs application. But finally, some solutions were basically found, such as disabling subroutines and other sorts of solutions to make it work. So another thing to consider is that there are also craftswomen who work in materials such as embroideries. So they're not used to drawing, unlike the tattoo artists who are very used to drawing and very comfortable with drawing. So they even struggle making motifs on their own cloth, on cloth or paper. And so for this reason, we started something called design methodology workshops to introduce craftswomen to design thinking techniques and give them the freedom to fail and learn, about their own craft through the making of letters. This workshop is tailor made for each craft based on its materiality and process. We use cheap and easy to manipulate materials such as paper and scissors. Here we see Bhami Devi, a Barmer patchwork and applique craftswoman, creating various designs with paper. The process can be challenging, and initially, some craftswomen could only make simple geometrical shapes, such as the ones you see here. These women who've never used a pen or scissor over the course of a few days managed to construct various types of letter forms with paper. Our process of working with craftswomen who work with Suf embroidery was different from that in Barmer. Here, the embroidery is made up of shapes that are derived from a triangle that are used in different sizes, as you can see here, and different combinations. So like you have a parallelogram, or you have a diamond, or an equilateral triangle, but they're all made up of right angle triangles. So we created these pre-made kits of different shapes and sizes for craftswomen to construct letter forms. Like here you see some of the Suf craftswomen making letter forms from these kits. So this is an important step in giving a sense of ownership to the craftswomen, as they could decide on the form of the letters on their own before making the embroideries. So most often craftspeople are just given the design to make. And this sometimes I feel insults their creativity and intelligence. A lot of them told us that they really enjoyed this process because they spent 2 days just having fun with paper and just making various forms and letters without much pressure. So I think this is really appreciated by them, and also encouraged us that maybe we're on onto something interesting. So what's important is that letters and type are very, I would say, important from several perspectives. Firstly, letters are decontextualized from the motifs and patterns artisans are used to working with. So it challenges them in different ways than a motif that they're already used to seeing. Secondly, most craftswomen or craftspeople are still illiterate in India, and the use of an emphasis of the alphabet gets them interested in learning how to read and write. Many craftswomen and their children wanted to learn the alphabet during some of our workshops. And unfortunately, the patriarchal systems in India are still pretty deep rooted, in, especially in village India. And women and girl children are actually excluded from education. And I think what we're trying to do here is to emphasize the importance of education and learning to read and write for everyone, but especially for women and for girls. I'm going to briefly talk about some of the challenges we face. So, I mean, collaboration of this kind always holds some sort of risk, as the processes can lead to imperfection, messy results, because this is a highly complex process, and in the, in the types of people, language, and belief systems that are all coming together. So the outcomes may not always look aesthetically pleasing, especially to a foreign eye. But I think this is beyond about worrying about aesthetics, and working with typefaces such as these address myriad facets that relate to geopolitics, colonization, and the division of labor. So there's a clash in ideologies between the Western definition of design, which espouse uniformity and consistency, versus the more traditional definition of pre industrialized craft based design. There's also a clash of being true to the intricate, irregular, and eccentric nature of the handmade versus the precision and uniformity of the digital medium, which is designed to make everything aligned, perfect, and legible. The idea of legibility or clarity is an interesting metaphor in terms of nuanced layers and the complex history of local communities, their identities and crafts, are, how they're being transformed into this kind of digital typeface. In addition, the poignant association of letters to literacy, which have various other caste and colonial subcontexts too, which I won't get into, are important to consider. One of the challenges with designing typefaces in Typecraft fonts is that these are all made by hand, right? So there are certain inconsistencies like this. For instance, this typeface, Barmer, it's a Barmer craft called, this typeface will be called Phool Patti, which means flowers and leaves, because that's what it's made from. But you can see that in some places there are a lot of these, you know, I guess, cuts that have been made. And in some cases it's a little more smoother because that's how it's done by hand. And when we trace it, these inconsistencies come into the typeface. And then the challenge as a type designer is that do you fix some of these inconsistencies, or where do you fix them, or where do you not fix them, and how do you decide how many nodes to remove or keep? Do you keep everything smooth and consistent, or do the or how do you bring in like the hand quality? So like this form is a little shorter than that form, or there's a little bit of a notch here, and this is the thing that takes a lot of time. There's a clash between how designers in urban spaces work versus craftspeople in villages. Despite the challenges of working in a rural setting due to distance, language, etc., Typecraft is committed to creating social value by building bonds between the urban and rural, between the mainstream and the subaltern. And it's about breaking down stereotypes that divide craft and design. Interestingly, graphic design itself started as a craft-based profession with punch cutters, letterpresses, binderies, and foundries. Subconsciously, combining type and craft has always been a part of graphic design history. Lastly, I'm going to turn to the idea of education. So, Typecraft started 9 years ago as a way to collaborate between the rich and myriad crafts of the subcontinent. At the time, we didn't realize the larger possibilities of this initiative. But now we realize that Typecraft is not just about font design, but it can make a larger social impact to craftspeople, school children, and design students. So, what does it mean for a typeface to have plant and animal icons embedded in them? Uh, of course, this has much to do with the cultural significance and the pehchan of these motifs and icons for the local communities that use them. But beyond this significance, we have realized that typecraft could be an effective way of learning the alphabet. We have been experimenting with new letter forms to educate children at Loka, a rural school in the state of Bihar. These children have found interesting connections between letters and objects, a fun way to learn the alphabet. And since language itself started out as an image, maybe this is where typecraft can contribute most to. In fact, there are almost 200 million Indian women still illiterate today, and Typecraft can make more of an impact as a tool for literacy and education by bringing local context and meaning. So we endeavor a world where children of the craftswomen can become literate from the very letters their mothers are making. Our idea is to make a learning app that addresses rural communities in their own language, employing local crafts that emphasize folklore and mythology of the region as part of the education. The idea is to bring ownership of the digital content back to the village community. Recently, we have started the daunting challenge of making a Devanagari alphabet in Mithila typecraft with images embedded in the letters. Does this look familiar? These glyphs are both pictograms and alphabets. In this image, the only connection between them is formal. However, here we've actually made something in a form of an ideogram where the rendering of the letters themselves relate to an object that connects to the sound of that letter. This can take on a greater meaning and context for school children, where they can connect letters, words, and narratives like they already have started doing, as I showed earlier. We've also thought of coming up with ideas such as alphabet quilts, which can not only teach children the alphabet, but it also sensitizes them to the tactile world of craft, as well as educates them about color and other aspects of the handmade, which are often missing from our education today. Typecraft is also being used around the world to give designers an alternate way to construct letters without the use of computers. At the same time, it sensitizes students to the various crafts and the communities engaged with them. So in the last few slides, you saw students both in University of Edinburgh and in India at NIFT working with paper and simple tools, just like the women in Barmer were doing, or the Suf women, which we showed earlier. I'd like to conclude by saying folk arts and tribal art have been, for the most part, ignored by graphic designers in India. By engaging with them through Typecraft, we're creating a much needed discourse on what can constitute Indian design. Importantly, this has an opportunity for both craft and design to benefit from each other. Design can make a real difference to craft communities through the introduction of different tools and resources to re examine these crafts. However, at the same time, craft can humanize communication design, which tends to be driven by technology, and enrich it through the embedding of cultural symbolism and meaning. Thank you very much for your time and for listening to me. Look forward to questions after this.